Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're going to take a quick look at the Game Master's Toolkit for Dune Adventures in the Imperium, the wonderful 2D20 based RPG from Modiphius Entertainment. We've been through the Agents of Dune Super Starter set at this point and the core rulebook. So this will just be relatively brief in comparison. First of all, this GM kit is, at least for me, it was quite a bit cheaper than the ones for Star Trek. I think that's primarily because in Star Trek, they came with those lovely, high-quality sort of reference cards for each of the different bridge roles. Obviously, you don't have that kind of equivalent in this game. Space travel is controlled by the guild, and it just sort of happens. It would be nice, however, to have had maybe some player reference cards somewhere included with this. There could have just been, even just one page of, something that could be passed around with the players. But there's a few of those floating around online, of course, anyway, so you can always make your own. But it would have been nice to have one of those with this as well. But the content that's included for the GM, however, I think is exemplary. So we'll take a look at that. First of all, you get the screen itself, of course. So on the back side, first of all, you'll note that it's a standard kind of A4 portrait orientation rather than the sort of odd square shape of the Star Trek RPG screen. The Star Trek Klingon Empire screen is also A4, so we'll look at that in a future video as well. And you can see that the back side has a map of Arrakis, which is very appropriate. So it actually has useful info on it. So we have some key places marked out here, such as the worm line. So the worms can't get past this line on the polar cap. We have the polar sink there, and the shield wall, which protects the main cities of Carthage and Arrakis, which are up here. We have the Habanya Ridge and the Cave of Birds. We have Kind's Research Station as well. What else we got? We have the Cielago Depression. We've got Box Canyon. We've got several communities of smugglers over here. Yeah, and Sihaya. So it's actually a useful map of Arrakis, and of course we have some lovely sandworms out there representing the deep desert where, here be dragons, basically. And on the final panel here, we have the Funeral Plain, very appropriate name, the Habanya Erg, big area of deep desert, and the Great Flat. So really, the only places where humans are hanging out is fairly clustered around the North Pole, because everywhere else is filled with sandworms and extremely hot, and basically there's just hidden sieges of Fremen out there. The normal folk can't survive out there. On the inside, we have a lovely reference for everything you need for your GMing. So we've got a summary of what the skills and drives represent, of course, which is always useful, as well as what traits can do. So let you try something you couldn't do normally, make something easier, make something harder, or stops you doing something you could normally do. We have a guide with examples for difficulty levels from simple at 0 to epic at difficulty 5. We have a summary of the skill test procedure, which is really helpful, as well as the use of assistance, the complications range, and the success set cost mechanic, where roll may be changed to a bare success if the character suffers a complication. Of course, you can even add more than one complication if they happen to roll one during their unsuccessful roll as well. Then we have a summary of players using determination points, which is helpful as well, and the general procedure for challenging drives. So if the statement for the drive being used does not contradict the action of the skill test, you proceed as normal, and you can spend determination on it. If the statement for the drive being used contradicts the action, then a challenge has occurred, and then it tells you what to do with that, and how you can then recover a drive once it's been challenged and crossed out. Then we have a summary of the most common momentum uses, namely buying d20s, 1 to 3 points, and it's additive, remember. So the first die costs 1 momentum. If you buy a second die, that would be 1 plus 2 equals 3 momentum total. If you buy the third die to get 5 dice to roll, then that would be a total cost of 6 momentum. Or you can use 2 points to create a trait that relates to the action just attempted. You can obtain information. For each point of momentum, you can ask the GM a question. But the GM doesn't have to be super clear and obvious with the answers, of course. Then here's a summary of how threat can be added. So again, the players can add to the threat pool in these certain ways, and the Game Master may add due to threatening circumstances in the environment or elements in a scene, or through the momentum gained by non-player characters that adds to their threat pool instead of having momentum. Then there's a summary of how to use your threat spends. So you can buy d20s for your characters, NPCs, you can increase difficulty, You can do NPC threat spends. You can buy off NPC complications, the same as players would do. You can create traits for 2 threat, just like players can do with momentum. You can cause environmental effects or narrative changes, and that cost can vary depending on how hardcore you want to be with it. You can spend 1 threat to introduce a known enemy house into whatever the situation is, or you can spend 3 threat to effectively use a determination point if you're using NPCs. If they gain a determination point, they instead would gain 3 threat. So you don't effectively have determination as a GM. It comes in spending 3 points to use a determination point, 3 points of threat, rather. Then we've got a very useful summary of the conflict rules. So, of course, we have the 3 types of conflict with rules references for each. But the general basics of using and moving assets is all summarized here very nicely. There's a summary of how to gain and spend advancement points. So generally, again, the advancement points come through adversity. So pain, failure, or peril, or for progressing your ambition, or if the group thinks that somebody did a particularly noteworthy thing during a scene or during a general roleplay task. And then it gives you a summary of the skills, so when players want to buy in advance, how much that should cost in terms of advancement points. And particularly useful, again, here we have the attack sequence all summarized, all very clearly. So choose the target and the asset you're using, make a contest skill test, and then you increase or decrease the difficulty according to what assets are present. If you successfully attacked, then if the enemy is a minor NPC, they're immediately defeated. If they're a notable or major NPC, then defeating them is an extended task, and each successful attack scores points towards that task equal to 2 plus the attacking asset's potency, and you may add +1 to this by spending momentum. If you defeat an opponent, you may spend 2 momentum to inflict a lasting defeat. So that means they're really, really out of it. And of course, all player characters, notable and major NPCs, may resist defeat once per scene. When they do, they may continue the conflict, but that doesn't mean they're healed up. They don't get their points back if it's an extended test situation. It costs 1 momentum or adds 1 to threat and causes whoever does it to suffer a complication. And the amount of momentum or threat spent to resist defeat increases by an amount equal to the potency of the asset used to cause that defeat. That's actually really important to remember. I think a lot of people forget that. So, for example, as you will see when we look at the Arrakis sourcebook, if you have a proper, well-made crysknife as a Fremen, with, say, a quality of 3 or maybe even 4, and you strike somebody down with this asset, then the amount of momentum or threat they'd have to spend to resist defeat would increase then to 5, for example, if you had a potency of 4 for that asset. So that makes a big difference. Very, very lethal weapon. Finally, on the last page, we have the general rules for creating NPCs. So for miners, you can give them 1 trait. Instead of creating drives, use a single quality rating from 4 to 8. Which is used instead of a drive, and there's no drive statements at all. They can have 1 skill ranked at 6, 2 ranked at 5, and 2 at 4. And they can have 1 focus for the skill ranked at 6. For notables, they get 1 trait. Some may have a second trait if they have a certain reputation. 2 drives rated at 6 and 7. All others are 5. They have a drive statement for 1 or both of the higher rated drives at 6 and 7. For skills, they have 1 ranked at 7, 1 ranked at 6, 2 ranked at 5, and 1 at 4. They get 1 focus for any skill ranked at 6 and 2 focuses for any skill ranked at 7. And they can get 1 talent, though some may have 2. That's the Game Master's option. Major NPCs, they get 1 trait each for their role and reputation. They may have a 3rd faction trait if applicable, so if they're a Bene Gesserit or Fremen, etc. They have a full range of drive scores like a player, and a statement for each drive rated at 6 or higher, same as a PC. They begin each skill at 4 and then freely assign 11 more points, but never going higher than an 8, of course. They can have 3 to 5 focuses as required by the concept of the character, and 2 to 4 talents or equivalent abilities. And then instead of picking a talent a major NPC might have, you can choose one of the following. So there's some extra options here to make things a bit simpler. So proficiency just means when using a specific skill in a certain way, the cost of the first bonus d20 is 0. If they're threatening, when using a specific skill or acting in a certain way and buying d20s with threat, you can re-roll a single d20. If they have guidance, then whenever you assist an ally, you can re-roll your d20. Substitution, you can use a certain skill regardless of the one usually required for a test. Familiarity, if you attempt to perform a specific test, you can reduce the difficulty by 1 to a minimum of 0. And finally, additional threat option, you can gain a specific or unique benefit by spending 1 or more threat. So these are nice ways to give you sort of a general, powerful and useful talent that is pretty generally applicable if you don't want to go through the list and you need to generate a NPC fairly quickly. Finally, we have a story hook generator, which is helpful. So you roll a d20, you have a plot that you can keep rolling to get a goal, a location, a hazard, and a character that is involved in some way. And then you can try and build a story hook around that. So let's say you roll a 5, solve the mystery of the secret data, which is located in the smuggler's base. The hazards are, well, they could be the desert, say, or the smugglers themselves as well. And the main character would be, perhaps a merchant or a smuggler. So you can see how these can combine into a lot of different possible quick story hooks if you want to get a game going without too much fuss. But really, the key resource for that is the GM Toolkit book here, which is short. It's just 36 pages or so, I think. But there's tons of great story hooks and ideas in here and ways to get games going off the ground quickly. So they start out by kind of setting out this idea that there are a number of traditional story hooks that lead to an adventure, right? So dramatic stories usually boil down to humankind versus nature, humankind versus civilization, humankind versus tradition, humankind versus other humans, humankind versus God, or humankind versus the unknown. And you can often have these more than one at a time, right? We see that in Dune as well. And these are intended to include kind of the major types of stories that occur in a typical Dune adventure. Each story seed that they present in the book is given in certain ways as well. So they give you a dramatic hook, which is a means to get the player characters drawn in, a call to action, usually in the form of a non-player character to be met, a clue to follow up on or activity to be completed, a locale where the adventure starts and where it goes, the stakes of the activity, so they could be obvious or could be hinted at by the possible outcomes the players can imagine. And finally, there must be some sort of opposition that could be, the Harkonnen operatives, a bunch of smugglers, or just, trying to survive sandworms out in the desert. Few of the adventure seeds present a likely outcome. This is for the GM and the player characters to determine. And you can, of course, combine these, expand them, or even invert them. And there's also an adventure generator, which is great. So they give you a number of different thoughts on the different themes that are laid out. So we have a wilderness survival theme for mankind versus nature. The climate of Arrakis is, of course, perfectly suited for this. So they give you some story hook ideas here, like looking for hidden spice, a certain Fremen who seems to have seen a worm sign signal and fled, but they found a crashed ship buried in the sand. Some say it's a Zensuni Wanderer colony ship, which would be a very ancient relic, and it could be full of wonders, or it could have been picked clean already. But you want to be the only people interested in such a relic, obviously. In urban survival, so this is kind of on the theme of humankind versus civilization. There's some more adventure seats here, like the Catch Tube Cantina is a good one. We've got Lost and Found, centered in the Arrakeen marketplace. We've got Neutral Ground, which is set in the dusty alleyways of Arrakeen, and kind of in the underworld, if you like. There are places where spies and nobles can meet and speak freely. Then there's setups for political intrigue. So this is kind of placed under the humankind versus tradition theme. And again, we have some story seeds here about, agents from minor houses trying to uncover their true purposes, uncovering secrets of the Sardaukar, the Emperor's elite troops. Then the theme of Khan-Li is presented as the Dune example of humankind versus other humans as a story theme. So here we could have the beginning of a war of assassins, or characters' debts coming due, things like that. And humankind versus God is less directly applicable to Dune in its literal sense, but we do have a lot of themes of mysticism and tradition in the Dune series. So there's plenty of opportunities to work that in. Of course, it took Paul Atreides time to believe that, the different practices of the Bene Gesserit and the beliefs of the Fremen had validity, and that he did have the ability to be someone that he didn't believe himself to be initially. So here we see themes about prescience and reverend mothers and the mysteries of the spice, etc. Finally, we have humankind versus the unknown. So this works well in the concept of looking for other planets or other worlds, of which there are many in the Imperium. So I like the Shadow of the Moon here, which is a nice example. So it notes that many great houses rely on weapon stockpiles, and they often have mechanisms for kind of second strike retribution if they're destroyed. These kind of doomsday stratagems are supposed to act as a deterrent from their house being destroyed completely. One of these bases appears to be on one of Arrakis' 2 moons. So that's a very interesting setup for a story, I think. And then we have the wonderful adventure generator. So it starts all the way from the title. So first you roll for the title structure. So it would be character of location or location in location, proverb or saying, this kind of stuff. The main character types that are involved, the locations. So it could be a certain type of terrain, a type of building or structure, stronghold or siege, etc. Dune itself, or some prominent non-Dune planet like Ixgadi Prime, etc. Then sometimes the focus in the title will be an object or animal. So here's a table to roll for that. Could be a special weapon, vehicle, mundane object, jewelry or clothing, food or drink, or an animal. It could be a concept is the center of the adventure. So revenge, religion, calamity, conspiracy, battle, business. And what kind of institution or group is involved? Could be a noble house, a guild or order like the Mentats, the Bene Gesserit, Swordmasters of Ginaz, etc. Could be a political group like the Landsraad, the Chom, Directorate, etc. Militant groups like the Fedaykin of the Fremen or the Sardaukar, or a cultural group. So the Fremen as a whole, Ixians, Benetlaxians, whatever. Then we have the generation of the adventure itself. So, how are you going to begin? What's the first scene? And there's a nice 120 table of what your characters are doing when the adventure hook kind of kicks off. What are the first steps? What gets people kind of hooked in? So you have things like the players come across a wounded NPC, a superior of the player character summons them to a private meeting, a non-NPC appears to threaten or attack them, thinking them already involved in the plot. Then there's tables to generate appropriate NPCs, their allegiances, the typical enemies you'll encounter during the adventure. They could be mercenaries, Fremen, assassins, spies, a mob of seemingly normal citizens, face dancers or golas or other weird stuff as well. Then there is discovery of big plot point, so an assassination, a kidnapping, sowing dissent, defying the Imperium, destroying a belief or custom, even wiping out a whole group or a house. And the purpose of that plot could be political gain, Kanli, vengeance, assassination, personal pride, gaining resources, or complex reasons. So roll twice and combine. And we have a lovely, once again, 2-page spread of a night scene across Arrakis here. Then the antagonists. So how many are there? Is it one singular and notable person? Is it 2 equally notable antagonists with an uneasy alliance? Is it 2 rivals? Is it 3 rivals with different motivations? And then who are they? Are they commoners, nobles, heirs, consorts, assassins, scientists, spies, face dancers, Bene Gesserit sisters, golas, or a complex antagonist, which is a combination of 2 or more of these? And then the nature of the antagonist. They could be zealous, they could be moral and decent, but deceived. They could be maligned, but actually have good intentions. They could be prideful and want to avenge something. So many different possibilities here. And the method of their plot. What is it? So is it overwhelming attack, clandestine operations like raids, sabotage, espionage? Is it Kanli, so a war of assassins? Are they using specifically trained animals? Are they bribing or seducing? Are they extorting, coercing, executing? Yeah, so as you can see, there's a huge amount of possible adventures you can generate from this, with a ton of variety and detail as well. So if you need to put together a game in a few minutes, this is a really invaluable resource. And there's also examples here for, some disruptions and random events that you could throw in just to kind of throw the players for a loop for a bit and send them on a side quest, or potentially lead them down red herrings, or forcing them to overcome an obstacle on the way to their goal, which is pretty cool. And perhaps there's a hidden hand behind the scheme. So it could be a Fremen Naib, or a director of Chom, a leader of a great house, a Tleilaksu master, a Bene Gesserit sister, or a Gola, or a concubine, all sorts of stuff. And then once you have all that information, who is leading who, then you can put together an intrigue map, in case then you have an intrigue or espionage conflict. You'll have the zones all drawn up and ready to try and get players to use their assets to succeed in that conflict. For supporting NPCs, there's also some nice tables for rolling those up. So general character concepts, their background and their main skill and their motivation, which would be their primary belief amongst duty, faith, justice, power, or truth. Then you can roll for their allegiances. You can roll for a peculiarity. So they recommend generating up to 3 particular peculiarities. You roll 2d20 and cross-reference. So let's say you roll 9 and an 11. Then you'll get ignorant of some common history or knowledge. Then you roll again and you get a 14 and a 6. They have an unusual diet, right? So little quirks that give the character some life, some personality. I think that's pretty cool. And then they give you a full example of that generator being put to use and an example of an intrigue map. So here's an influence map. So there's a person here who must infiltrate this particular siege. This person is a resident of that siege, so they want to convince this person to allow them to do that. But they are married to this person who's the second command of the siege, and they are the sibling of Galal, who leads the siege. So by using your assets and moving your players around in this intrigue map, you can try and find a way through to your infiltration of Siege Toma, for example. There's another example here where we have a nameless Samuta den, drug den, and we have somebody blackmailing somebody else. They meet at this den, but they're currently betraying this baronet person. This person also meets over there, and they're often flattered by so-and-so, and they control this location. So you can see there are lots of different ways you could try to gain influence over somebody to proceed to that den and try and resolve whatever your plot point is. And here's an example of how spice operations might be organized. So you have somebody here who is lovers with this person, who's a senior member of this group down here. And basically they are sort of running a conspiracy to basically scavenge spice. So all these examples really sort of help flesh out what you can do with this great tool set they've given you. We've got one final example here of Children of the Jihad. So this is dealing with a spacecraft ruin near to Siege Faris. And so there's a face dancer involved, there's Fremen involved, there's all kinds of cool stuff happening. So it really shows you how you can really make a pretty interesting set of connections for an interesting adventure out of this toolkit, which I think is great. As with the core rulebook, the examples that they set out are really wonderful. Then we have some cool locations. So a smuggler base called Sand Boulder with some key characters. You've got a smuggler leader with traits, assets, and talents already set up. We've got a persuasive fence, a maintenance engineer, and an ornithopter pilot as well. And then we have some characters for a minor house as well. So you got a ruthless business person, taciturn bodyguard, and then we've got a House Waku passenger ship with some descriptions of what that location looks like, and some key characters, the House Waku head steward and the House Waku trader. So yeah, this booklet is really cool. I think if you are a GM, of course, having a GM screen is always helpful just for the reference side. But the toolkit is excellent and includes a lot of really useful tables, and this whole adventure generator toolkit is really excellent. I mean, the examples and the example intrigue maps are super helpful. I think, the toughest part as a new Dune GM is coming up with an adventure that has enough juice that you can generate these kinds of interesting circumstances, relationships, locations, and conspiracies. And this toolkit can really help you do that. Even if you have sort of a glimpse of an idea, you can use this to fill out some of the gaps that you can't quite figure out. So for that reason, if you are a GM running Dune, I would say this is really an essential purchase alongside the core rulebook. This toolkit is great. Of course, you can buy the PDF version if you want to save some cash, and you'll get both a PDF version of the front and back of the screen and the GM toolkit itself as well. So either way is good. I prefer having the physical copy, even if I'm playing a digital game, because I like to sort of try and reduce my use of the screen, even if I'm playing online. So I have a physical and digital copy. And of course, always remember that if you find a Modiphius product cheaper elsewhere, if you send the receipt to support@modiphius.com, they will, without question, give you a PDF for free of that product you have purchased, even if you got it used or from eBay. If you can prove that you have it, they will give you the PDF, which is a wonderful policy, and I highly support it. And I've just used it recently for the arrival of the 2 most recent supplements as well. So kudos to Modiphius for that generous PDF policy. Please keep it going. And if you're a Dune GM, yes, then look into the GM Toolkit. I think you'll find it both visually appealing and really helpful and even essential for generating one-shots or short story arcs that can even build up and mutate into long campaigns if you work with what they give you here, which is quite a bit. So that's it for now. I hope that you found that useful. I'll be back again soon with some looks at Dune supplements as well. So look forward to that. In the meantime, as always, take care, stay well, and remember, fear is the mind killer. All right, bye-bye.